My name is Grace DeWitt, and I'm the National and International Outreach Programs Coordinator at the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. And I'm so happy to welcome you to this final virtual artist panel in our series, exploring our newest exhibition, New Worlds Women to Watch 2024. New Worlds features 28 contemporary artists from across the US and around the world, and the show opened at our museum about 2 weeks ago now, and will be open to the public through August 11th. I have the pleasure of working with the museum's network of 31 outreach committees, and these committees are groups of NMWA members who advance our mission for gender equity in the arts through grassroots programming and audience building in their respective regions. Women to Watch is an exhibition series designed by NMWA, our museum, in collaboration with these national and international committees. And my colleagues, Ginny Trainer and Aureen Zara, will go over the series in greater detail. Ginny Trainer is Senior Curator at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and Aureen Zara is Associate Curator. And the two of them co-curated New Worlds Women to Watch 2024. It's always a privilege to hear from Ginny and Aureen, and especially today alongside the incredible artists in the show. So as we move through today's conversation, please feel free to ask questions at any point. I recommend using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll have some time to address those questions at the end. Thank you so much again for joining us. And without further ado, I am passing things over to Ginny.
Thank you, Grace. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the last panel in our series of panels engaging with artists, the 28 artists in New Worlds Women to Watch 2024. So it's a little bittersweet, but I think it's very fitting that Arena and I are co-hosting this one because we've been kind of switching back and forth thus far. As Grace mentioned, the exhibition is open. If you're able to, please do come and see it. It's going to be around all summer. It looks absolutely fantastic, and I can say that because I had minimal input into that. We work with a great crew here, and of course all the work in the exhibition by these amazing artists are fantastic. I just wanted to say a little bit about the theme of New Worlds, and Irene, feel free to jump in if you want to. Those of you who know our Women to Watch series know that in the past the theme has often been focused on a particular medium, whether that's paper like we did in 2020 or metal in 2018. But Arena and I were tasked with coming up with the theme to this Women to Watch in 2020. And if you think back to those dark, dark days, it was really a tumultuous time. Not only were we had been through lockdown, the pandemic was still going on, but there in this country, the very contested political election going on, and then lots of social justice demonstrations and backlash to those demonstrations. And so we felt like any theme that we came up with really needed to kind of tap into the zeitgeist of the time, but also thinking about where we might be in 4 years. And here we are 4 years later, and what kind of concerns are similar. What have we maybe resolved? Probably nothing. But so we came up with this idea of new worlds, and we were really interested to see how artists are thinking about things in different ways, because I think this is something artists do really good. I think you guys are visual philosophers, right? You help us see things in new ways. You help us think about things in ways that we haven't before. And really, I think your art a lot of times can open up areas for conversation to sometimes very difficult subjects. And so this exhibition, we wanted it to be a balance of different media. So we have photography, and we have sculpture, and we have textiles, and, we really have it all. And I'm just so happy with the way that it all came together. It is a bit of a jigsaw puzzle to kind of create a cohesive exhibition out of all these disparate elements. But, as Arena and I were putting this together, we really had in mind, what works. We're going to talk to other works, and then we kind of saw these themes emerging. as we were working on things. And so that's kind of how we've structured this series of virtual panels. And so today's last panel is really thinking about the deep sense of community and shared lived experiences and how those play integral roles in kind of people's sense of world building, right, of community building. And the artists who are with us today on the panel, Migiwa, Daniela, Molly, and Eliza, will be speaking briefly about their work. Rajyashri Goody, the artist from India, was not able to join us. She's in transit, but she did send along a brief recording that we'll play for you. So we're going to do a brief intro of each artist before we allow them to speak for a few minutes. And then at the end, we'll just have a nice easygoing conversation. And, if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A box. And I'll turn it over to Orime. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginny. I echo in your sentiment that this feels truly bittersweet as we kind of bookend our panel discussions with this last panel on this idea of community and the collective, because this project, I think, has been such a communal effort, such a collective effort, and so collaborative. And so I too thank all of the artists for joining us today. And as you share screen, I will start off with Rajyashri Goody and a little bio, a brief bio on her before we play her recording, and then we'll talk a little bit about her installation at NMWA specifically. So Rajyashri Goody is actually, she represents India, one of NMWA's newest outreach committees, the first time for India to participate in the Women to Watch project. And Goody's art practice is informed by her academic background in sociology and visual anthropology, as well as her Dalit roots. She holds a bachelor's in sociology from Fergusson College in Pune, India, and a master's in visual anthropology from the University of Manchester in the UK. She incorporates various mediums in her practice, whether that's text, voice, paper pulp, ceramics, photography, printmaking, video, or installation. Her work creates space and time for thinking through everyday instances of caste-based violence and Dalit resistance, and how elements like food, nature, language, and literacy are actively used as tools to enforce caste rules for generations. Goody is interested in how the caste system has been challenged by her family and larger community, and the cultivation of self-respect, confidence, and dignity as a personal and collective practice. Her work highlights how Dalit identity is being reclaimed and reinvented today through acts of everyday resistance. And the installation that she has she has created that is being shown at NMWA for the first time is called Losing All Taste. And it's one of her ceramic sculptures, ceramic installations with sculptures of food items and everyday objects that are part of Dalit life. So with that, I think we can go ahead and play the video, the recording, the audio recording that Rajyashri has sent us.
Yeah, and I'll just say, make sure that you have your volume turned up, because I have everything up as far as I can on my end, but it's still kind of low.
Hi, I'm Rajyashri Goody from India, and I'm going to do a brief introduction of my work that's been included as part of Women to Watch 2024. Thank you so much. My work is called Losing All Taste, and it's a ceramic installation about 8 feet in diameter.
Did the audio pause for anyone else? Is that on my end? Okay. Jenny, do you think are you still able to hear it?
Yeah, is it not working?
It stopped maybe
No,
10
we
seconds
lost
ago.
the video.
Mhm.
Okay, let me rewind a bit.
I start to make
How's that?
I hear it
I'm just
again.
going to
Mhm.
read a few recipes out. This is from Urmila, like these poems, recipes are adapted from Urmila Pawar's book Aidan. And one such recipe is cake. Invite your daughter's friend to eat cake on her birthday. When she comes home, feed her. She might tell her mother of the photographs of Ambedkar and Buddha in your house. The next day, her mother, a semi-literate woman, might come and stand at your door. She might abuse you without stepping inside. She might shout that she didn't know you were from this particular caste. She might say, "We are Marathas, we cannot eat with you." If you complain to your daughter's teacher, she might ignore it. Wonder what the difference between them is. After some days, your daughter's friend may start coming home again. And one more, which is a sort of recipe around water. And I tried to include the element of water in my ceramic installation somehow, if it's visible. Anyway, water. Towards the end of March, if your well goes dry, go to the well of the Maratha caste to fetch water. If you're a new bride, don't go. It won't be nice. If you go anyway, you might see your women standing with empty pitchers, begging the Maratha women for some water. Retract your steps, your empty pitcher in hand. I'll end with this. Thank you again, and I look forward to hearing and watching the videos from all the other participants.
I just want to go a little bit into the work in case the audio was a little bit difficult to understand. So Rajyashri Goody is herself a part of the Dalit community. And for those who may not be aware of the social structure within Hindu society in India, historically, Dalit people have been considered so-called untouchable within the caste structure in India for centuries and actually for thousands of years, and denied access to land, food, water, and literacy, as I mentioned in the little bio. So what she really does in these ceramic installations is delve into the food experiences of the Dalit community, or lack of food, because often the Dalit community would have to resort to begging for food or use leftovers from members of upper castes and create their own dishes. So they've had to be resourceful and innovative with how they gather food and how they cook and eat food. So what you see here, and this is a good image, is some food items. So if you see those circular in the right-hand image, you see this sort of circular shapes. Those are referring to bakris, which are round flatbreads, which are very popular in Dalit cuisine because they're made of millets, small starchy grains. Typically, a lot of the rotis, the breads are made of wheat, but wheat is very expensive, and the Dalit community has not had access to expensive ingredients. So they've made bread out of the cheaper ingredients like millets. You might also see little like twigs and leaves and branches and things like that. And those are gathered to start a fire. So they can then put a big pot onto that fire and put all the kinds of leftovers that they've been able to gather to create kind of a little melting pot, a new dish from all the different kinds of leftovers. If you go to the next image, Ginny. So you may have heard Rajyashri read 2 poems. What she usually includes with her ceramic installations are these booklets that include recipes / poetry. So she's extremely interested in Dalit literature. So she reads these autobiographies by various Dalit writers about their experience with food and excerpts from them and kind of adapts them to sound poetic. And so once you are in the gallery, you can pick up one of these booklets, walk around the installation, and read through these Dalit words about food as you look at the artwork. And so what you were hearing her read in the video, in the recording, was poems from these booklets. So if you come to the exhibition, you'll be able to like sort of sift through the booklets. And then lastly, I want to just point out a couple of details from the installation itself about some of the other kinds of foods. So upper caste members of Hindu society don't typically eat meat, particularly beef or pork. And if there are caste members who do, they don't eat digestive remnants and entrails. So often those become common food items in Dalit cuisine. So on the right, you see these kinds of glazed, meaty kind of stones that are referencing those kinds of food items that are popular in Dalit cuisine. And then on the left, you have this kind of domed structure. And if you heard her recording, she's mentioned this idea of water. Water is really important too, because Dalit members don't have access to the same water sources as upper castes. So what she's referring to here is this history. In 1927, Dr. Ambedkar, who was a social reformer, an activist for the Dalit community, a really major figure in the Dalit community, led a procession of more than 10,000 Dalits to a water tank in Western India. And so through this very nonviolent act of gathering and collectively drinking from the pond, the group asserted their basic human rights. So it was sort of this community asserting their rights and their Dalit identity. So what you see here, anytime you see these blue-green tones, she's trying to evoke that imagery of water. And the dome is also resembling architecture of Buddhist stupas, which are these structures that hold relics and sacred objects. And stupas were also sacred for Dalit people because a lot of them converted to Buddhism as a way to escape caste discrimination that they faced within the Hindu structure. And if you see the entire installation, do we have an installation shot of the whole thing? It's circular, so you can circumambulate around the installation as if you were in a prayer around a stupa. So they're just some elements of this installation, which is really dynamic in person, and I hope people are able to come see it. But she also talks about using ceramic as a medium because of its associations with soil and mud, and because when ceramics are fired, they become hardened, and she likens that to Dalit resistance over the centuries. So I hope that gives a little bit better idea of what Rajyashri's work is about, which is really beautiful and very poetic in its way.
Yeah, thank you, Irene. I think that was a wonderful description of it. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce our next artist, Eliza Naranjo Morse, who is a mixed media artist from Santa Clara Pueblo in New Mexico. Her work explores the existential questions that arise from current and historical events, personal experiences, and spiritual seeking. Eliza uses drawing, land, collaboration, sculpture, and writing in her practice. She receives an ongoing education from her extended family and holds a bachelor's degree in art from Skidmore College. She works mostly locally in New Mexico, but has also traveled internationally for various forms of creative knowledge gathering and sharing. She lives on Santa Clara Pueblo land and continues to work with creative and communal expressions and the universes of possibility that lie within them. And for our exhibition here at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, she created this beautiful mural directly on the wall. And at the left-hand side, I'm showing you kind of a larger shot of it and then a close-up on the right. So Eliza, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, or hello to everyone. It's good to be with all of you today. In my mural contribution, I've illustrated a moment where beings are traveling. They're carrying knowledge and tools. They embody their histories and carry articles that acknowledge their relationship to life beyond themselves. They are wearing items that reflect the generosity and common ground created through connection. These beings are traveling with a source of light. This light is their power, and it's really an expression of love, their love. I've illustrated their pink and blue lights meeting and a new color, purple, created by their joining. In this purple, a new universe of possibility forms. At the horizon line of this work, there is a suggestion of more beings with their light traveling just behind these figures. Everything in this artwork is surrounded by starlight, an expression of the miraculous fact of our existence. This mural was created out of my enthusiasm for reading the book Indigenous Research Design, Transnational Perspectives in Practice. To me, this book is an explanation and it is a guide. How we came to this disconnected earthly circumstance and a path actively being remembered and forged to offer an alternative route to travel. It plainly reminds me to know that there are options for how to create a different world. And it affirms that our local efforts to do this are significant. This book is so useful and beautiful to me that when I was offered wall space in this valuable and game-changing institution, I wanted to express the importance I found within the book. On the left of the main mural is a stalk of corn. Illustrating this plant connected to the ground is an acknowledgement to the spirit and power existing in our natural world. I try to keep in mind that we are here at the end of every day because of highly developed systems for interconnectedness created by our shared home.
Thank you, Eliza. That was beautiful. And I have an image here of you painting that mural. And because I know it's a question we're going to get, maybe we can just answer it right now. How long did it take you to create that?
I was in the space for 9 hours a day, or 9 days, excuse me, for full days. And maybe now, so that length of time, and maybe I can note now too that I took little breaks, and so I think I'm one of the very few fortunate people that got to experience the exhibit over time. I was there during the install, and so to get to be within these other artists' work was just a totally incredible experience. You know, imagine being able to sort of meditate on a wall while you're painting and then go take another artwork in. This show is so powerful, and I'm fortunate to have experienced it in that way over 9 days.
Thank you. And your work is incredible. I had the opportunity. I saw you starting at the very beginning, and then I didn't see it till it was completed, and it just really blew me away. It's beautiful. Thank you.
For me, it was really magical to see it sort of come together as I was there throughout the week and saw it sort of getting more and more involved, and hearing you talk about it as you're working on it. It was really nice to see your process unfold, Eliza.
Great, thank you. I feel good. I feel good about it, which is it's a great feeling. Yeah.
Next we have Migiwa Orimo, whose work you see on the screen. who is our artist from Ohio. Orimo was born and raised in Tokyo, Japan. After receiving her degree in literature and studying graphic design in Japan, she immigrated to the US in the 1980s. She primarily works in installation consisting of text, drawing, objects, video, and sound that explores the notions of gap, slippage, and a realm of disjunction. Using the concept of storage or archive as her framework, Orimo explores the relationship between public memory and private space by examining how memories are shared and internalized, how they are stored and become stories, and how memories and history collide. As a social justice activist, Orimo facilitates People's Banner Workshop and provides free banners to activist groups. So with that, we'd love to hear more about this work, Migiwa.
Thank you so much. Again, all the curators and staff at the museum, I'm so grateful to be part of this group of women artists who are very powerful in their own messaging. So I really appreciate that. So the work you see in the museum is called the Signal Morse code. It's an embroidery on linen with just a simple knots and dashes with the red embroidery floss. What I did here was that I translated into Morse code anti-war writings and other critiques of patriarchal norms written by women from different culture, past and present. Some people, some conceal their identities, or some people get detained for speaking out. For example, some of the writings stitched here, Afghan women's short poems called Landays. To avoid retaliation, these poems are composed and only communicated orally from woman to woman. These stitches reveal the hidden narratives and experiences of women who had been silenced or oppressed in their own culture. Morse code is, we don't get to really see it being used, but Morse code is historically, most of the time during the war, used for long distance communication without words. And I wanted to use this device to create connection or be, reaching out across barriers like language, time, and location, and making their presence felt collectively together, and to show the strength and resilience of these women in the face of adversity. And also, this repeated, very simple act of stitching of my own also connects to the act of many Japanese women during World War II. This practice is called the senninbari. It's literally translation is 1,000-person stitches. And what they did was the women passed from woman to woman, and usually in your neighborhood, a piece of cloth, and each stitches simple knots. And the idea is to reach 1,000 people, 1,000 stitching of a little knots on a small fabric. And as a result, this piece becomes the Shinto amulet, made by Japanese woman, and it's given to their sons, husbands, brothers who are going off to the war to die for the country. And but this is also their form of resilience, and it's a silent prayer, but the message is very clear and loud. It says, don't die and come back alive. But in the society during the war, that sort of message was not allowed to say out loud. So this is also my background of creating this piece using the red thread and repeating this making of knots. In my case, is a Morse code, is to connect to those people. And it's really also the title signal is really a verb, not a noun. And I hope that sort of work signals us to actually act. And it really to underscore the need of solidarity through this work, but it's also, it's really that solidarity is being more than ever needed in us and in our society, and to act. So that's my work for this piece, for this show. Thank you.
Thank you. That was lovely. I hope that we'll have more time to discuss at the end, but I just had one quick question. As you were speaking, it occurred to me that the various lengths and widths of the fabric onto which you've embroidered is all different. And it kind of, to me, seems to echo the dots and the dashes of Morse code, but is there any particular significance behind the differing shapes and sizes of the textiles?
No, the simple sort of idea behind it is I wanted to use the linen, and that was a kind of a way to sort of reflect the sort of archiving our own work, women's work throughout the history, and to use the linen was important. But it's also, I wanted to negate the sort of notion of colorfulness here, because sometimes if you bring the color, people tends to be attracted to the color first. And by just keeping it monochromatic, sort of a color tone, really message or concept about the work come through better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are the reason.
Yeah.
I find you saying that interesting, Migiwa, because one of the things when I was looking at it that really struck me was the color of not the linen pieces, but the embroidery itself, that sort of red, that blood red embroidery. And I think you can maybe see it better in the detailed image. Was there a reasoning behind using that particular color for the embroidery itself?
It was really literally, that's the decision of making a red thread is the same as senimbari, the Japanese women's practice during the war. They used the red thread, and you know the color red. It's really also the blood, but it's also women's blood. There's just so many symbol in there, but that was a direct sort of connection to the practice, not to the sort of a historical practice of women. And also in the museum, there's also a accompanying little booklet that it shows you the sampling of some of the writings and background.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
so you can actually, when you walk into the galleries, you'll actually be able to read through some of these writings that are in Morse code on the wall, which is really beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, next up, we have Daniela Rivera, who is representing our Massachusetts committee. However, she was born in Santiago, Chile, but she moved to the US and received her MFA from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts in Boston in 2006. She's currently an associate professor of studio art at Wellesley College. Daniela's work engages with ideas of displacement, memory, and cultural migration to celebrate difference and reject categorization. Through a wide range of materials, she hopes to open space for the creation of new meanings through meaningful materials, reconfiguration of forms, and the challenge of functions. Daniela is invested in generating projects that always leave space for the public to intervene and share in the authorship of the piece. Daniela.
Thank you. I was very ready, but I didn't unmute myself. Sorry for that. Thank you so much. And thank you for all being here, and super grateful and honored to be part of this exhibition. And I have to say the exhibition is really beautifully put together. And going through the exhibition, I actually got to go like 3 times through the exhibition. you can see how in the curator's work trying to make sense of the works and how the works talk to each other, and there's beautiful conversations going on. So thank you so much, super honored. I'm gonna try to make a long story short. Many years ago, I started working with copper mining and extraction processes and terraforming processes. I was thinking about environmental devastation and other things, but I encountered doing a lot of interviews of people being displaced by industry, a story that just kind of kept me concentrated and focused for a while and not knowing what to do with it. And this was the story of a woman. As I'm interviewing her, she tells me how in this particular copper town in the middle of nowhere in the Atacama Desert at 3,000 meters of altitude, Atacama is the driest desert on earth. She was a third generation born in this particular mining town. And in the 1970s that the mining industry in my country was nationalized, just to give you a sense of like historical, political history of the country related to the industry as well, that is part of the project. And she told me how all the men had political representation and how all the men had protected gear, professional training, and many other benefits from the company that at that point was also a national company, and how women in the town that were nurses, teachers, stay-at-home moms, had tons of different social functions, had none of these social protections. And after approaching the company, they didn't get any traction, so they approached the soccer team that at that point was a first division soccer team. Sorry for this this is most narrative work, but it's interesting story. The soccer team was formed by their husbands and sons. So they said, okay, we'll recognize you as the female branch of the Cobreloa soccer team for visibility. That brought enough visibility so later in life, they were able to present political candidates for the union, the Copper Workers Union. And Mirta Moreno was elected and hold the position of president of the Copper Workers Union for 40 years, just coming down a few years back. They never touched the ball. They never kicked the ball. They never went into the field as soccer players. They just used the system in order to gain visibility. A lot of these conversations were had around a kitchen table when after the kids were taken to school, and they would gather for coffee, all the women talking together and socially organizing. And this made me remember about the French resistance and women talking around the kitchen table during the Second World War, or this resistance in Spain during the Civil War as well, organized by women around a kitchen table. So after not knowing what to do with this story of social organization and community building, and also political transformation, I started playing with a soccer ball in the studio and decided to bounce it, never kick it, and started generating these drawings that didn't have a left or a right, a front or a bottom, and they were done with impacts of the soccer ball on the paper. And the papers are dyed with malachite and azurite that are also minerals part of the copper industry, and treated with copper point drawings on one side, and the other side has the impact. And so I decided to put the impact and the working and the building of the drawing on the underside of the drawing, the underside of the table, and the more passive, industrial drawing and delicate drawing of pointing to the copper industry on top. And that's how this piece came about. I hope that makes sense. And it's probably one of my most narrative pieces, and it was a really interesting choice. And I thank you so much, Jeannie and Lorraine, for having chosen this project to be part of the exhibition.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have an overall shot of the installation, but here is one of the components from that series, and this is hanging on the wall. You can see it's tinged, and then you can see the reflection in the mirror. And then the other component is, of course, this table, kind of stand-in, right, for the kitchen table. And the drawing is face down, and you see the reflection underneath. And then there's also a really nice video that's not part of the artwork, but helps to contextualize it as well. And I think it's wonderful because the only sound that you hear in it is the wind, which I gather in this area is just ever present. But it's an interview that you did, right, with one of the women. And so you never really see her face, you just see her hands. And then there's, you know, the captions at the bottom. And it's a absolutely fascinating story.
Yeah, I actually decided to do the hands and the torso specifically because when I started doing the interviews, this is a town that was there since the 1800s. It was actually founded by the Guggenheim brothers with a company that was called the Chile Exploration Company when they were looking for lands and copper pits in Chile. The industry was in hands of the UK and American companies, and then in the 70s nationalized, and then the price of copper altered internationally. That was one of the triggers of the military coup in the 1973. So the political history of the country and the international kind of relationships is really interesting in relationship to that. But then you have these kind of like individual stories, and the town was dismantled and people were relocated in 2008.
Oh.
And so when I started interviewing people, they were talking about their loss of identity and their loss of home. And a lot of the expression of recalling memory was in their body language. I'm sorry, in their body language, but not verbally. Verb wasn't really able to transmit the emotional connection to place and territory and to labor. And it was held in the hand. So that's what you see is this attempt of grabbing memory.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. That's really powerful. And I also loved how these women were able to gain political power through their kind of ingenuity and being resourceful and coming up with this idea of unionizing through the soccer team, the football team. It's a fascinating story. And I didn't know that about the hands. I was always so intrigued by that video, but that's a great insight to see how you chose to focus on the hands and the torso to relay that emotion. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Our last but not least, our artist from Washington, Molly Vaughan, holds a BFA from the School of the Visual Arts in New York City and an MFA from the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida. And is currently a senior associate professor of art at Bellevue College in Bellevue, Washington. Her interdisciplinary work, which includes drawing, painting, textiles, and addresses representations of transgender people, including the erasure and violence they experience. In 2018, Vaughan presented a talk at TEDx Seattle about her ongoing Project 42, which memorializes transgender murder victims. And we see two of those examples here in the installation at NMWA. So with that, Molly, I will hand it over to you.
Hi, thank you. So I also want to begin by explaining and sort of speaking on the idea that to be in this exhibition is very humbling. I'm coming from a period of time when trans women, my generation, trans women would never be included in this conversation. And of course, currently, there are many people who wish we weren't. The work that is on view is part of Project 42, which began in 2012. As I started to socially transition, I recognized that I was a member of a privileged part of the trans community. I had education. I was working in academia as an adjunct and fighting my way through that system. And I came from a working class, middle class background. And so when I began to start to think about what kind of impact could I have on my community, one of the things that really struck out to me was the low life expectancy of trans women in America that was being published through research both peer-reviewed research, but also research that was coming out of the sort of community-based areas of the trans movement. And that life expectancy that was being published was about 25 years. And so I started thinking about that and started thinking about like, how is this data being collected and where is it coming from? And so most of it was coming out of public clinics and public health systems. And so I did my own research approach and created a survey and had people fill it out. And my demographic that I did that from was more like middle class and above. But what I was hoping to achieve was a broader understanding of like what our life expectancy was. And the number I came up with was 42. So when I averaged all these numbers together, I got 42. So, first, I think it's really important to state that the trans movement in America as we know it today is a movement that is predominantly white, middle class, identifying and I guess like seeking, right? Like that when we talk about elevating trans people, we're often talking about how to normalize my community in such a way that we have access to upward mobility and health care and all these really important things. But those discussions often leave out one of the largest parts of the trans community, which is BIPOC trans women and trans women in particular who are experiencing intersectional state-sponsored violence. And so when we look at the life expectancy of trans people, the numbers that we see are often impacted by the high rates of violence against trans women. And recently, I believe, because it's been tracked more, trans men who mostly come from BIPOC communities. So I wanted to sort of use my privilege as a way to elevate the discussion around this issue of violence. And what I discovered in particular were white cisgender queer allies who would almost at times like tell me I was wrong, that this wasn't an issue that was happening. And so I said, okay, so this is the group of people I have to reach. So I began this process of finding a way to talk about this violence without further victimizing individuals through trying to narrate their stories or show their faces. Grief is a big part of this project, and the sense of like, there's the grief that like I feel, and when people help me make this, the grief that the people who are helping me make these pieces feel, but there's also like the community grief. And I wanted to always be very respectful of that grief and to not add another layer of victimization to that by telling stories I didn't have a right to tell. So all of the work is based on the actual location of the violence. And I use Google Earth to go to those locations and take screenshots, and then I abstract those screenshots to make colorful patterns as a way to pull people into these conversations they don't know that they need to have. And it's interesting to use satellite technology that's coming from the United States government because as trans people, we are in constant surveillance by that government. And so things like GPS, GPS is derived from military technology. And so taking that technology as well as the internet and like using it as a way to elevate discussions around the safety and protection of my community was one of the things I was also really interested in. The garments are made with, they're an inkjet print process on the outside, and on the inside, I work with often students to silkscreen layers and layers of information by hand on on fabric to make the linings from. So there's a dichotomy between the interior and the exterior, which is something we all experience, right? The fabric has a certain size pattern on it. The same pattern is on the wool, but the wool pattern is smaller, and that talks about like clocking and outing. So I don't know if you ever heard about this phenomenon called transvestigators. Transvestigators are people who use like fake science to try to determine who is trans and who isn't trans. And it began in a sort of way of like clocking celebrities who were so obviously trans. Like Madonna is a trans woman, right? So first of all, this speaks this idea that being trans is bad. But also it goes to this idea of like cisgender people can tell who's trans and can therefore tell who is engulfed in deception. And so we call this sort of idea being clocked. And so trans women in particular come up with a system of how to avoid being clocked. So if you're a trans woman and you see another trans woman on the street you don't know, you're never going to acknowledge that person with words. You might wink at them, you might smile at them, you might say, I like your hair, but you're never going to out them, right? So it's actually quite funny. I spent my whole life wishing there were other trans women, you know, because I didn't know what I was. And then I go to my doctor specializes in trans care, and there'd be like 7 trans women in the doctor's waiting room, and we're all looking down, like, because none of us want to admit that anybody else can see, you know, that this is a trans-centered space. So clocking is this thing that, you know, is, you know, it comes up in this transvestigation sort of ideology that began on the internet, on places like Reddit and things. And now we have it through the opportunity of state-sponsored violence being elevated to the place of people, you know, calling the police and saying there's a man in a dress in the bathroom. And then the police come and, you know, often the victim is not trans, right? And so like there is a constant pressure on trans people to not be outed. We carry that pressure all the time. I tend to approach this these days by just like just being like, yeah, I'm transsexual, you know, like here I am, like I'm not here to trick you, I'm not here to deceive you. In fact, when I was deceiving you, it's when I wasn't myself, you know, that was when the deception happened. And so a lot of this violence happens within the same context, which is a violence that occurs when individuals are tricked by trans people. And the reality is that they always know that they're trans, right? And then they use this idea of being tricked into the notion that this person was trans to cause violence because of internalized transphobia and shame. This often occurs in a very brief time. And so there's 8 inches between the wool and the garment, and that recognizes that, you know, that is a you know, visualization of that moment of where violence can occur. So the wool pattern is different from the dress pattern ever so slightly. So once you notice that they're different, you can't unnotice them. So, you know, one of the things that I talk about a lot is this idea that like in the United States of America, in a very large number of states, that the gay panic and trans panic are still legal defenses. So that means you can go to court and be accused of murder, and you can use the trans panic and say, well, I didn't know they were trans and they tricked me. And you'll receive either a not guilty or you will receive a lower sentence because the trans panic is a legal, lawful, you know, way to get out of being accused of murder. More than 90% of the individuals that we lose every year are BIPOC trans women. And especially the 42 people I selected. So I used that number 42 to select 42 people. There was only one list on the internet that I found that had names. So I just chronologically selected 42 people. And a lot of those people were taken between like 2008 and 2012. And so the articles about them are articles which I don't actively share with people unless they're collaborators, because they're misgendering, they're victim blaming, and sometimes the only photograph of these people is a mugshot. And so when I bring this work into these institutional spaces, one of the things that I think is so important to really elevate is this conversation that, like, first of all, not all people who are trans that are taken by violence are sex workers. But if they are, so what? You know, sex workers deserve our respect. And like I have friends who, because they're trans, they have positions where they are at work and they're working a job and they are still doing sex work to try to make a living. So sex work has an integration with trans history that cannot be ignored and should not be downgraded. You know, many early trans women that were trying to get through the Harry Benjamin systems of being given access to medical care were asked to take on middle, you know, wage jobs or low wage jobs so they could prove that they were women, so they could get the care that they needed. And it meant a huge lack of money because they made so much more money doing sex work. So that they had to lower their economic income in order to obtain like the legal qualifications to have gender affirming surgery. And Harry Benjamin and all these early institutions, they promoted the idea that they were doing a good job by saying, look, we turn away 95% of people. That's how we know that we're doing a good job. And so like that is just like an example of like what they were seeking wasn't so much to help people. In fact, some of these people started doing gender affirming surgery just to see if they could. It was not, we're only going to accept people who are going to be integrated into lower middle and middle class society. So the last thing I'll say is when you watch, if you are like me, and you may not be probably, but I watch a lot of these legislative sessions about anti-trans laws, pay attention to who they bring as witnesses. They don't bring young trans children of color. They bring young white children to prove the validity of transness. And so all of this intersectional issues that result in violence against trans people are also part of the assimilation model of the trans movement. And so I do believe in my work, one of the things I need to do is to use my privilege and my place to sort of fight for the visibility, not just of this issue, but also for the issues that are leaving behind the most marginalized of the marginalized communities.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Molly. We're unfortunately we're over time, but I really would like, if you're okay with doing so, could you speak a little bit about the activation component of these works?
Yeah.
I think
So
that's a really important part of it. Yeah.
absolutely. So
Sorry, Molly, just 1 second. Thank you for joining us, Daniela, and good luck on your thesis defense. I know you have to skip out.
Oh gosh.
Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah.
Yeah, each garment that I make is made to fit a collaborator who activate the garments as a way to share experiences with the person that they are memorializing. So it could be something very simple. I've had people just go out to eat with family and friends. I've had people take garments I've made them to Italy and sightsee. And I've had professional dancers choreograph brand new dance works to honor the individual. So what we ask them to do, first of all, to collaborate with the project, they actually have to do all their own research on the individual and the issue. And then so they have to agree to doing that. And then the next thing that that they're asked to do is simply share an experience that you would share with a family member or a friend. The only group of people that I work with who are allowed to narrate a story of violence is if that person shares the same identity as the person they are memorializing. So in particular, especially as like a white artist, it's not my job to imagine what life of a BIPOC trans person is like. And so when I work with a white collaborator, the same thing. They're not, we're not qualified to imagine what the experiences of a BIPOC trans woman may be like. And so instead we focus on this idea of sharing and making space for opportunities and experiences that have been stolen through violence. And we're going to be activating this piece at NMWA in the coming periods of time. We haven't actually got a date yet, so but we will be activating this piece in the museum, which I'm really, really, really excited about.
Yeah, we're working on it. We're really excited to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wore my t-shirt today just for Greg Abbott.
I love it.
It says transsexual immigrant educator. Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, just said that he wants to end trans and gender nonconforming teachers. So take what you will from the concept of ending us, but that is something he is like openly platforming on.
Yeah, just only slightly disturbing. Well, thank you so much for that, Molly. Gosh, I wish we had a whole other hour to to really engage in conversation. And for the artists, at least, I hope that you were able to speak to each other more during the opening and on the bus rides to the embassies and everything like that. Thank you, Migiwa and Molly and Eliza and Daniela, who had to run, for joining us today. It is really always such a pleasure and such a treat to hear directly from artists about their work. And each of your works is so incredibly powerful and moving, which I think is why Irene and I gravitated towards it and wanted to include it in the work, and definitely speaks to this kind of idea of the power that lies in the coming together of people to just get through this thing that we call life, right? And I think your work definitely, all of it, demonstrates that we're all stronger together. So thank you very much.
That's
Thank you
beautifully
so
said,
much.
Jenny. And I just like to add Rajyashri's name, who wasn't able to join us, but sent a beautiful recording of her reading her poetry out loud. So so wonderful to have all 5 voices be part of the conversation. And with that, I will hand it back to Grace to close us out.
I have further thanks to give. Thank you so much again, Eliza, Migiwa, Molly, and of course to Daniela, who's defending her thesis, and to Rajyashri, who prepared audio remarks in advance. Jenny, Noreen, always such a generative conversation. Thank you. And also thanks to Joy, who provided our cart captioning today. I'll also thank all of my colleagues at the National Museum of Women in the Arts who help organize this virtual program. Always takes a village. And I want to thank our art outreach committees who partner with the museum on this ambitious exhibition. In particular, thank you to the leaders and members of the India Committee of NMWA, the New Mexico Committee of NMWA, the Ohio Advisory Group, and the Washington State Committee for making it possible for these artists to be in New Worlds Women to Watch 2024. And thank you to everyone here and to all of our members for fueling programming like this. It's such a rich and rare experience to all be here together. Thank you. With that, I will say that New Worlds is open at our museum through August 11th, 2024. I'll pop the link into the chat before we head out, where you'll also see information on how you can visit the museum. Take care, be well, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Grace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.